Welcome and thank you for joining us for this virtual artist talk featuring Professor Elaine Lorenz. My name is Kristen Evangelista and I'm the director of the Paterson University Galleries. Today, Professor Lorenz will be speaking with us about her artistic practice. First, I would like to outline the format for today's presentation. I will briefly introduce Professor Lorenz. She will discuss her artwork for about 30 minutes. With a PowerPoint presentation. Then I have some questions that I would like to ask her, and we will conclude the event with time for the audience to ask questions. So please feel free to type questions in the chat box during the course of the presentation, and I will read those aloud. I would like to thank all of those who made this event possible. I'm grateful to Professor Lorenz for preparing this talk and being with us today. The event was realized with the support of the gallery staff, including gallery manager Emily Johnson, collections manager Casey Mathern, and our graduate assistant Taylor Cassisi. I would please ask the audience members to stay muted during the event. This program will be recorded and it will be available to view on the gallery's website in the near future. So now I would like to introduce our speaker. Elaine Lorenz is a sculptor who works in diverse media, such as wood, metal, concrete, encaustic over wire armature, ceramic, and fiberglass. She was born in the Bronx and currently lives in New Jersey. She grew up both with the influence of New York City and the countryside of the Berkshire Mountains in Massachusetts, where her family grew up and later summered. Over the years, Lorenz has abstracted various aspects of nature, from the large rock formations of the Southwest to tiny seed pods. Her references to nature vary from ecological concerns to the uplifting joy and spirit found in living things and the repetitive patterns and textures observed. She received her Master's of Fine Art from the Vermont College of the Fine Arts. For nearly 30 years, she served as an associate professor at Paterson University, teaching ceramic sculpture. She has had numerous solo exhibitions, which were held at the Fulcrum Gallery in New York City, Bertha Ordang Gallery in New York City, the New Jersey State Museum in Trenton, Art Space in Richmond, Virginia, the Morris Museum in Morristown, Art Yard in Denver, Colorado, the Tomasulo Gallery at Union College in Cranford, New Jersey, and numerous others. She has received awards and residencies, including a McDowell Colony Fellowship, 2 New Jersey State Council on the Arts Fellowships, an Athena Foundation grant from Socrates Sculpture Park, and a Geraldine Dodge Foundation grant. Her sculptures are in public, private, and corporate collections cited in Alabama, California, Florida, New Jersey, and Texas. One of her sculptures is actually on our campus behind the Shea Center for the Performing Arts. And last year, her outdoor sculpture, Elan Vital, was commissioned and installed in Piermont, New York. She also has served in various roles as the Vice President of Exhibitions and the President of Sculptors Guild from 2011 until 2018. I'm really excited that her work will be showcased in the upcoming exhibition Fertile Ground, which will be on view in spring 2021. This exhibition is organized on the occasion of her retirement from the faculty in the Department of Art, and the exhibition will include many of her sculptures, including some works by a handful of her former ceramic students. And I just want to mention that the image behind me is an installation shot of an exhibition that she had at the University Galleries, I believe in 1991.
Yeah, I think so, or 90 maybe.
1990.
You probably know better.
So it's really nice for us to have this opportunity to revisit Professor Lorenz's work and see all that has transpired since this exhibit so many years ago.
Well, thank you, Kristen, and all of those who have joined me here today. I'm sorry I can't see your faces, but I'm hoping that you are doing well in seeing this presentation. I wanted to let you know that Christian suggested the title of my show, and which is called, I just blanked.
Fertile Ground.
Thank you, Fertile Ground. And it's really so perfect because all of my work relates to nature, and that's what has influenced me for so many years, as well as thousands of other artists. But the title also bears witness to this university and the art department that has supported both students and faculty in their search for self-growth and artistic endeavors. Many things have influenced my art over the years, but nature was the strongest one. I'm going to share my screen now and start the PowerPoint, which may just take me a minute or two. Okay, here we are. Oh, sorry. All right, so many things have influenced me over the years, but nature was the strongest one. As Kristen mentioned, I was born in the Bronx and lived there till I was about 10. We summered in the northern Berkshire Mountains where my parents grew up, and my brothers and I would spend hours climbing the mountain trails and the streams, especially, that was on our property. This image is a picture of what my father would do after every year when we went up there in the spring after the torrential expansion of the stream because of the snow melt. New rocks would be overturned, and he would find them and bring them up to the grass area and set them up as a sculpture. And I sometimes wonder if this is why I became an abstract sculptor rather than a figurative sculptor, and why I'm so much in love with rocks that are carved by nature. Both of my parents were very creative. They were landscape painters. They designed their own house. They were gardeners and made household objects such as furniture, baskets, clothing, and other craft items. They both taught me hand skills as well as the use of machinery. But mostly I learned the joy of making things, to be productive, make something beautiful, and entertain myself. I know there's a group of ceramic students attending this talk, and I hope that you find my experiences and stages of art development encouraging and encourage you maybe to become a fine artist. It is difficult, but doable. It wasn't until my undergraduate years that I really decided I had majored in art, but I really was struck by sculpture, by two methods of working especially. One was in clay and the other was in carved wood. When I left home, when I graduated and got married and we set up our own apartment, I made it very important to have a studio immediately. And we rented a two-family house that had a basement, and I was allowed to set up a wood carving studio there. Ceramic was more difficult to get a kiln and all the electricity and all of that stuff. So think about your education right now. Get as involved as you can with all sorts of methodology and methods of working, and find out what really strikes you and follow that along in your life. One of the challenges of working with hardwood, carving directly in wood, is that you're sort of stuck with the shape of the wood that you start with. You have to make something work out of that particular log or a plank. And It's challenging, but and kind of fun. You know, it gives you a direction. So these are some of the pieces that I made after I graduated. Sometimes I was given pieces, like this one was a gift from my friend Carol. And sometimes my father had always collected wood, as he collected many other objects. All right, so I'm jumping ahead of myself here. I worked quite a while. I worked intuitively with wood. Sometimes I would carve away a bad spot, a knot, or a rotten area, and that sort of got me started. But around this time, my husband also got interested in making sculpture. He saw how dedicated I was to that. But his work was different. He taught himself how to weld, and he worked in steel using scraps that he found at various factories and things, and created work that way. After about a few years of working, we traveled around Europe for 5 months, hitchhiking and staying at youth hostels. We saw so many countries, museums, landscapes, and artwork. It was totally overwhelming and inspiring. It was so fantastic to be able to see the work that I had seen in art history classes in real life, and was surprised by some of them. Waiting for rides when we were hitchhiking gave me especially a lot of time to think about my future. I'm always somebody that keeps myself busy and perhaps doesn't spend a lot of time thinking. So it really was a amazing experience, and it made me want to really become an artist. We both had to keep on working. We didn't have a lot of money, but we struggled through. I became envious of the steel sculptures that my husband was making, because they could be put outdoors. They could be painted and put outdoors, which I really wanted to do it with my own work, but with wood, it wasn't really possible. I also was a little bit envious of the speed in which he was able to work. So I gave it a try too. I worked in a different method. Most of my work was designed ahead of time in cardboard maquettes, and then I had the shapes enlarged. I enlarged them using paper and a grid, and enlarged the particular shapes, and the steel company would cut them out for me. My husband helped me weld them, and I reciprocated by doing all his grinding and painting work on his pieces. It was a good time working together and sharing space. At that time, we had our own studio. But I never really loved working in steel. These are some of the pieces. This was a commission that I had, a private commission. And I sort of got tired of primary colors. And this was another corporate commission that I had. It wasn't something that I could control. I couldn't get the kind of curves that I liked. I tend to like more natural forms and natural materials. So I started searching around for something different. I sold all of the pieces that I made, so it seemed kind of foolish to leave, but that's what happens. You follow your dream. At the same time, this studio building that we had was in a very urban environment, and I really felt the lack of nature in my life. But there was a small backyard, and I spent many, many hours transforming that into a beautiful space in which I put some sculptures. And over time, with the two of us working in one studio, I went back to wood. And of course, working with wood when somebody's welding is a little difficult. So I tried a lot of different materials, some of them clay, and some of them I was doing some bronze work, small little bronze pieces. But then I decided I needed a real push, and I went to the McDowell Art Colony, which you have to apply and get accepted for. And that's a really wonderful thing for students, or let's say graduated students, to do, because you're treated really royally, and you're given the sense that you are somebody worth supporting. I got a grant from New Jersey that helped pay for the expenses. And you're treated, you're given lunch, you're fed all of your meals, you're given a studio and a place to live. I was there for 5 weeks, and it really made an impact on me. I became a little more independent from my husband. I spent, 5 weeks with many other artists and learning about their methods and talking to them. It was very exciting. But it was also very advantageous for another reason. When I got home, a few months after I got home, life suddenly interfered with my art career and everything. My husband was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and I found that this emotional experience was difficult, but it also gave me a reason to grow in my art. You need to take advantage of good things and bad things that happen in your life, and accommodate it to your artwork, or let it help develop your artwork. I started using his equipment, and not so much welding, but brazing, which is a different method of working. It uses an oxyacetylene torch rather than electric arc or MIGs. Nowadays they have MIGs and other types of equipment. And I could manipulate the material much more. Copper is a lot softer than steel, and I could heat up the copper and hammer it to get some more curvilinear shapes that I liked. These were based on the urn that I had made to hold his ashes. That's sort of what got me started. And I followed through and had a couple of different series, a more vertical series that was somewhat anatomical. And then I got involved with what I called landforms. My husband and I had been to the Southwest, which was a great inspiration for me. I love the rock formations out there and the sort of emptiness and vastness of the whole area. So, and the landforms were a little softer than the vertical pieces, but I did get a commission for both styles of work. And this is over in an industrial or corporate building just off Route 80 in Saddlebrook area. And this is the landform that's also there. So, but I really still missed working with nature. So at some point, I decided to experiment with actual plants. Around this time, I had met someone new. We loved to travel. We went out west, especially. He had the same sort of interest in nature that I had. He was a painter and a photographer. He is, I should say, a painter and photographer. And so we visited a lot of sites in which I saw earth, grass, or vegetation sprouting out of the ground in very inhospitable places. And it really excited me. So I decided to try to work with that. And I did a lot of experimentation with small maquettes, having them planted with seeds in an area that they had to be watered, of course. Then I started using moss, dried moss, which would stay more stable in an indoor situation. But it was very difficult working in these small pieces, so I felt that it was time to move on and get work in large pieces. I had the studio to myself now, and I really took advantage of it. At some point, I applied to Socrates Sculpture Park, which is something that was started by Mark de Souvero, a steel sculptor actually, who invited young artists to come and make large scale pieces. And this was my first really large scale piece. It's 10 feet high and 20 feet in diameter. And I built part of it at home and part of it on site. And it was a very long process. I invited all of my friends to help me cement it. It went, I had a deadline, and it was sort of a short span of time to create it. But I set up this object with shelves in it to have plants. And at that point, at the end of the show, we all had to move our pieces away. And that's how Nancy Ironhofer, the director of the gallery at that time, of the William Paterson Gallery, invited a number of us to loan our pieces. And she had crane trucks available and moved the piece. So I brought this piece to William Paterson. Over the years, the watering system that I had installed died, and I didn't really know about it, and the plants died, and students started climbing on the shelves, which were not that strong, and broke the shelf. So we've altered it now, we've repaired it, but it's a little different than my original intent. But here are some of the other pieces. At the same time, I had a show, as Kristen mentioned, in the Court Gallery at Ben Shawn. And that was my first really major solo show. I had one with my copper pieces in New York, but these were much bigger pieces in a much larger space. This piece was sold out of the show to the Castro Corporation, which worked nearby. They have since disappeared, and so is my sculpture. I have no idea what happened to it. And this piece is at the Morris Museum now. It's changed locations. It's out in the grassy area rather than on this back patio they had. I also had an exhibition in Soho at that time, and this is an image from that show. And these are some commissions. This commission took place down in Alabama, and it had to be, I made the piece in my studio, and it was shipped down and installed. And then I went down to check that everything was doing well. Much later, in 2006, I received this commission from the New Jersey Meadowlands. It was a jury, competition, and I won it. It was a nationwide competition, and it was a really major achievement for me in a number of ways. I won it over some very famous artists. I think it helped me get tenure at school, and it was the time that this dream that I had about this artwork actually will survive for a very long time. There's a built-in watering system in the circle in which I built the piece. There's landscape gardeners to take care of it. It's in a site that involves the environment. So it's really a perfect piece. If you ever have a chance, it's not far away. It's in Lyndhurst, New Jersey at the Court Park, D Court Park in Lyndhurst, New Jersey at the Meadowlands Environmental Center. So after that, I really had stopped working even before that commission with the live plants. It became problematic, moving pieces from place to place. They got damaged. They never had a proper watering system. It was very difficult to keep them alive. And that's why I like the Meadowlands Commission so much. But I decided also to go back to school. I forgot to mention that when I had the show at William Paterson, a year later, I was invited to take over suddenly in the couple of weeks after school had started, teaching for a sculpture professor that had suddenly gotten a sabbatical, and which I did. And then eventually I went on to teach sculpture. I was teaching, basic sculpture and advanced sculpture in various materials because I had that experience. And, but I just decided that I had to go back to school if I wanted to continue teaching. I had to get an MFA degree, which I did not have. And that experience really changed a lot of what I was doing. And this is the result. During the time at school, you do a lot of self-evaluation, you do a lot of research. And I went through various methods of working, but I came up with working with these wisteria vines, which grow around trees and actually kill them. And they had overtaken my grandmother's garden, which was up in the Berkshires, which is where we summered. And I started playing with them in different ways. This image was much later, but I had made some pieces with the vines and paper, rice paper, which I stiffened a little bit and layered over the forms that I created. I also started using mesh, and in this case, I wove in bark that I stripped from the vines. The vines, this is a natural thing that vines do, but I would take them and maybe join certain ones together to create the form. And the wire mesh helped a lot to create the forms. Then I started using beeswax, which the first piece you saw was the natural color of beeswax, and I started adding color to it. And that sort of changed it. I would smooth the outside of the form, but on the inside, I would let the globs of wax come through and let that be visible. You could see the forms and see the wax inside. And I suddenly realized that this was coming from another issue that had happened at that time. I had a little bit of a health problem. One of my arteries was closing down with plaque, and they inserted steel mesh into my artery. And here I was working with steel mesh or copper mesh or whatever, and sort of doing the same thing. So the pieces became a little more organ-like and a little frightening. But it was something that sort of happened subconsciously. Okay, so I call this series, by the way, the Enclostic Series. And as I said, most of it was done while I was in graduate school. But when I finished with that, I was still working at William Paterson this whole time. We had moved about this time, 2001, we had moved over to the Power Art Building. And from Ben Shawn, we had another art building. And the ceramic lab was right next to the sculpture studio. And I sort of knew that the next person that would retire would be in the ceramics area. So I started making ceramic pieces. I had the advantage of having access to the kiln and facilities. So it seemed like a really brilliant idea. And these are some of the pieces that I developed over time. I'm going to go back to this one. It started with my love of sprouting plants. Every spring, I wait for these little green shoots to come out of the ground. I now have a nice garden I live fairly close to the school, and I have a nice backyard that I've spent a lot of time working in. It's another creative outlet for me. And so when I started, sort of thinking about these forms, I tended to put them together in shapes to make a more interesting composition. But when that happened, when I did that, they became more animal-like. In birds or seals or fish or, various sort of smooth shaped animals. I'm going to just take a sip of water. So I call this series Birds of a Feather because they really seem like animals. I worked with the idea of the perilousness of animal life in our culture. In my last series of work, I started, really thinking about the environment and all of the difficulties that was happening, what we were doing to the earth. And now I was sort of moving on to the precariousness of birds and other animals and how their lifestyle was changing. So I made precariously balanced sculptures out of clay. But I also kept the joyfulness that I felt in viewing nature. And this piece was one of the biggest clay pieces I made. It was actually made in 6 parts. Because of the size of the kilns, you're sort of limited at what you could make, but I made 6 pieces of clay that fit back together again. And I hid the seams with epoxy and painted it with acrylic paint in a sponge-on technique using many colors. This was something I had, besides teaching, I had another job doing faux finishing, which I learned how to do some of this. But I continue making a number of these pieces in various sizes. But another thing happened at school, in which, and this was later, again, I'm coming back. Often you have a series of work and you leave it and move on, and then something happens and you come back to it. Well, what happened here was that William Paterson hired another sculpture professor, and he brought incredible technology to the school. This was Michael Reese, and he brought the idea of digital sculpture and carving by the use of a milling machine and the ability to scan sculpture. So I had that first piece that you saw, that clay piece, scanned by a grad student, and then was carved on the milling machine. It was carved in many layers that I glued together and refined and then covered with fiberglass and resin. And I displayed this in a number of places, and this Dwight Englewood School ended up buying it. And this, at this point, this was something that came about because of the Sculptors Guild. We had gotten a show there, and a number of us had pieces on display. Later on, I made another piece that was also made on the milling machine. And this was in a gallery that had an outdoor space in Piermont, New York. And it was there for many years. And finally, somebody saw it and wanted me to commission it to do it in bronze. And this is the piece that Kristen mentioned before. That's just south of the Tappan Zee Bridge on the edge of the Hudson River. And it was really quite an experience. And I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures that describe that process. On the left is the way that it was sand cast. They used my original and divided up into sections and cast one side and another side, and a difficult part they cast by itself. And then finally, on the right, you see an image of the 3 pieces. Actually, I don't think they're totally complete. I don't think the tops are finished, but where they had welded all the pieces together. Then the next step would be to chase the work, which means grinding it down, grinding off that skim of unpleasant material that's left from the sand casting, and repairing the welding joints, which had to be retextured to look like the texture I had on it. And then finally, a patina is put on it, so it's not that shiny, glossy, brassy look. And I chose the patina, and this is the worker who very methodically did one piece by itself, creating the patina. So my next change of types of art came about because my husband and I, as I mentioned before, spent a lot of time going to the Southwest. And this most recent time, we visited a slot canyon, the Antelope Canyon in Page, Arizona, which is absolutely incredible. It's created by nature. When nature finds a small crack in a stone mesa, the water dribbles through it little by little, and time after time, and ages and eons, it creates this form. I don't know if you realize, but a human being would be about this high. It's massive. And when you're on the outside, it's like any ordinary rock. But when you go inside, somehow the light is refracted on the white sandstone, predominantly white sandstone, and it gets into all of these colors. And I've always loved the idea of caves and going into caves and being surrounded by things. You can, may have seen some of that, like in the piece that was at William Paterson. I love allowing visitors to go into the site, smell the greenery, smell the dampness, and feel protected in a sort of sanctuary. And I saw this as a sanctuary. And just I have another view. It's just amazing. You weren't allowed to stay there very long because they had tour groups going in. It was very hard to take a picture without anybody in there. But, we persisted and hung on. And my artistic rendition of this became these series of work that I call portals. And, I made different sizes, different shapes, but they always had this curvilinear look to them with a hole in it, so that you were looking through to see what the future would be, to look forward, to follow a path. I mean, it was reminding me of how I love to follow a path into nature and see what's ahead. This particular piece was done in a raku firing, which is very different from a normal firing. This has particular glaze on it, and it's put into a container after the firing that alters the glaze, and it's unpredictable. You don't really know what's going to happen. This is a piece that has no glaze on it. That's just the nature of the clay that I use, which has little particles in it that turn different colors. Again, another raku piece. Of course, I have to keep getting larger, so I started making pieces, again, stacking them to make a larger piece. This is like a little over 5 feet high.
Elaine, I just wanted to jump in and let you know that it's 11:40. So
so I got to speed up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'd love for us to get to see the rest of the slides.
Okay.
And also have time for questions.
I was going to ask you how I was doing. Thank you so much. Okay. All right. So I got into, again, through Michael Reese, designing a sculpture by digital manufacturing process. It's something I didn't stay with. This is a piece that I'm working on right now. It was a commission, and you see our robot over in the corner. It was a piece that enlarged from clay, and I covered it with cement and fiberglass mesh. I'll just skip through that. These are my more recent pieces, based on really wild seed pods, and I worked with that for a couple of years, and then I started to go back to my abstract work. They were based on some of the things I had seen in nature, but were very, much more abstract and not specifically related to a particular seed pod. This is very recent work. I did it this past spring and summer. it got much of my work got more into spiky things as COVID kept us away from each other, as we became afraid of touching each other or seeing each other. I noticed that I was producing work that had not such pleasant surfaces. And this is the last piece that hasn't been fired yet. This is in my studio, and that's the end. So I'll stop share, and you can ask some questions. Okay, sorry. Oops.
No, you did a wonderful job. I'm sorry, Elaine, I didn't mean to make you rush through the end. I just have a couple questions that I'd like to ask you, and then I hope that the audience will be stimulated by all the topics and the process that you talked about to propose some questions. And there's a chat box where they can add questions. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your artistic influences. I mean, you mentioned nature inspires you. You talked about your parents being an inspiration as they were also artists, and your spouses also being a welder, and then your current husband is a painter and a photographer. But I was wondering if there are other artists that inspired you or mentors that you wanted to tell us a little bit about.
Yeah, I have like a couple of different stages. I mean, because my work changed so much over the years. I think early on with the wood pieces that Henry Moore, Barbara Hepworth, Isamu Noguchi, and Brancusi probably were my inspirations. In mid-career, when I was going back to school, I got very interested in the earth artists, Alan Sonfest, Robert Smithson, Nancy Holt, Richard Serra, James Turrell, and even Anna Mendiata a little bit. And with the Enclostic Series, I was studying Louise Bourgeois and Kiki Smith, who got involved with, and Anna Mendiata also got involved with bodies in some ways. The ceramic work there's so many incredible artists. It's really hard to narrow it down, but Ruth Duckworth, Richard DeVore, Michael Sherrill, those were some of the people that I still admire and look to.
Thank you for sharing that, Elaine. That's really interesting to see how your interests change as you worked on different series. It looks like we have a question from the audience. Suzanne would like to know what types of clay you like to work with.
I'm working, well, because I started with the school's clay, I started with Cone 6 clay, which means that it's fired at about 2,200 degrees. The clay that I'm using now is also a high fire stoneware clay, but it has speckles in it, as I said, that show up when you get into reduction a little bit more. I've also tried paper clay. Some of the pieces that you saw that when in the Birds of the Feather, I tried paper clay to see how that worked, but it really didn't work for me all that well. I mean, it worked like regular clay. It didn't really make a big difference in what I was doing, except that I think maybe that survived outdoors a little bit better than a stoneware clay.
Did you say it's paper clay?
Yeah, it's clay that has paper added to it. And the advantage, supposedly the advantage is that you can add wet clay to dried clay on your sculpture, so that which is not normal. Normal, you have to, work really hard and work well. It's in the leather hard stage. But paper clay has been devised to do that. But I think the way that I worked, it didn't help me at all. With other people, I have a friend who works with paper clay, and he can just keep adding clay to even when he thinks he's finished it and it's bone dry. He adds wet clay, which is a little different, but it has its own problems. It gets moldy very quickly in a bag. So
that sounds challenging. Okay, we have another question here. Casey, our collections manager, would like to know, what is it like as an artist working with other fabricators and makers to complete your sculptures?
Well, when I did that very large commission, I felt like I was a manager, a boss, you know, and I didn't like it at all. I'm really a hands-on person, and I don't like you know, like checking up on somebody and waiting for their, you know, when they were going to do something, and it really didn't suit me. You know, like working earlier on when I was working with steel, that was okay because you just delivered drawings and they cut it out and you got it, and then you know, it was like taking a material and working with it. Now having the advantage of digital carving, I think it's fabulous because I can design a small piece and then have it realized in a large scale. And all I have to do is give it to somebody and pay for it, you know. But the first, you know, like the copper piece that I made, I had to carve by hand all myself. I glued styrofoam together and hand carved it. Now it comes out pretty well finished. So it has good points and bad points, but I really like working on my own as much as I can. I wish I had an assistant, but you know, that's hard to do unless you have constant commissions or jobs.
Right, yeah, because your work, I know from when we were trying to repair your sculpture on campus, it's very physical.
Yes.
And it, especially working outdoors, you know, good times to work is in the summer when it's really hot, and
Yeah.
the mixing of materials. So it's very demanding work.
It is.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. Let's see, try and take them. Okay. Your work that involves plants and stone or ceramic, how do you feel about it looking so similar to the designs of sustainable architecture?
Huh. Well, I think that may have been, of course, I think I was way before that. That was the piece on campus was made in 1989.
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't think I was influenced by it at that time because I don't think I knew about it. But I did get a lot of negative remarks that it was corporate art, meaning I don't know what that meant exactly. But I think because, you know, of its scale and that it, you know, had to be taken care of. And you know, most people don't want to take care of things, especially our environment. But I think that I would be happy if it was compared to sustainable architecture. I actually had some contact with people who did green roofs, and they sort of wanted to work together with me, but it was difficult, so I didn't.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at the other questions. I might have already touched upon this, but it sounds like Karen would like to know more about the direction that your work will go from here. So I don't know if you want to elaborate more on the recent work that you showed us.
Well, I'm not sure myself. I feel like I'm going to continue with the smaller clay sculptures. It's getting, you know, more difficult for me to work in large scale pieces, but I'm really not sure. I think that the experience that we've all gone through recently with COVID and being isolated and being afraid of each other, which is really strange, is will affect me. It's kind of slow, you know. I don't. It may look like I jump from one thing to another, but it's over years. I mean, each series has been 6 or 8 or 10 years long. But I was going to say something and I forgot now. I think that it probably will, a lot of it will stay in clay. I do one large piece every so often. I am involved with the Sculptors Guild, and I might make a new piece for a show that's going to be in the Lower East Side for that, which would have to be a large scale outdoor piece or fairly large scale. The one thing that I think that has changed, and which I didn't get to explain, was that I've always had this very joyful and uplifting view of nature. And with the seed pods, I think that changed. I chose to, when I started doing research after finding the first seed pod on a vacation again, that the dried, empty seed pods were much more resonant with me than this joyous view of nature that I had because of what we're doing to the earth. I think I became more ecologically concerned with that concept of, you know, maybe these seed pods are not just going their ordinary cycle. Maybe that's the end of them, that they will disappear. They became sort of metaphors for what we were doing to the earth. So I think that whole thing has shifted. So again, I don't know, you know, how that will play out and what I'm doing in the future, but I think that will be a big change in my artwork.
Thank you. So I'm just checking to see if there are any more questions. I have another question, which might be a good closing question. We're getting close to noon.
Okay.
Given all of your accomplishments in your career, you know, over 30 years of teaching and exhibiting and being involved in the Sculptors Guild, I was wondering if there's any advice that you'd like to share with students and young artists, some of whom I think may be the participants for our conversation today.
Well, yeah. Take chances. Do things that you're terrified of doing. While you're in school, explore as many different things as you can. You know, I know that you all have to make a living. I had to do that. And I wasn't prepared, as well prepared for that as you were. But as you are, because I know what you're, you know, a lot of you are learning art skills that can be paid. I didn't really learn that. But keep in mind that, you know, I'm hoping some of you will go into fine arts. Faculty members, you know, learn what they're doing, learn their lives, listen to other art talks like this. I mean, it's been so hard to get you all to go to an artist talk, and it's important to learn how people deal with different things. Document your work, really document it. You know, trying to put this together, I didn't have pictures of a lot of work. What else? Travel. I found travel really, really important. It exposed me to different things that I didn't see in real life. Of course, the internet is also great for that aspect now, again, which I didn't have growing up. But just keep working in art. I mean, when you're off from school, you should be making art. That's all, whatever it is, even if it's you know, something that just interests you, and you know, you may not show it to anybody, but keep doing it.
Great. Thank you so much, Elaine.
I think that's all.
That's really excellent advice. I'm just waiting to see if we might have one more question, or if there's one more thought that you want to share with us. since I know we didn't get to spend as much time on the seed pod work, if there's something else you want to elaborate on.
And let's talk to the students that are in ceramics right now. They're learning the basics, which, can certainly be expanded. I mean, the whole idea of making pieces in multiple parts, which I found in all of the work, like the work that's pictured behind you, especially for someone that doesn't have a lot of money or a lot of strength, the idea of making units that go together to create a larger whole is a great way of working in whatever material you're working with. I think I learned that from looking at Henry Moore's work, for instance. And he always had multiple parts to his work.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about your work having multiple parts, but when you see the final product, it's not always evident. And I know that
Right.
from your work in the faculty show, it's so carefully designed that it can be easily transported. And then you have these different components and they seamlessly with the steel armature and they fit together into a very nice whole, cohesive whole.
Right. Well, that I try to hide the fact that they're separate, except for like the precarious pieces in clay that were made to look like they were going to fall apart. But yeah, it's important to, sometimes it's important to hide that evidence, and sometimes it isn't.
Right. Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions, but we did get some really good audience participation. Yeah. So I'm really grateful for those thoughtful questions and feedback on your work, Elaine. And thank you again for your time. It was really wonderful to go in depth and see how your work's developed over the past 30 years and the different points of inspiration for it, which makes me even more excited about your upcoming exhibition, Fertile Ground, which is going to be on view in the Court Gallery, 30 years later.
I hope all the people listening can get to see it.
Yeah, I hope so too. We all need to wear our masks and stay safe until then to make it possible. But I want to thank you for being here. And I just want to let everyone know that we'll be having one more virtual artist talk this semester. Zara Dogan will be joining us for an artist talk on October 19th at 2 o'clock, and more details will be on our website. But thank you again, Elaine, and I think Professor Julie Nagel and the other faculty who've encouraged their students to be with us here today. I hope everyone has a nice afternoon.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you everybody else for being here. Hope to see you. Bye.
Bye.